Dick Stan Greene by Sean Amick and Terry Rogers. You can find it online and in certain bookstores near you. Chapter 1 of Buffaloes and Lawyers. Bang, bang, bang! The impetuous knock brazenly shook the unsteady window within its weakened frame, waking what could only be described as a time-weathered man. Curled upon the old and stained sleeper sofa, angled from the impulsively beat-upon door. His eyes opened the curtains to the stage of his reality, neatly accompanied by the flatulent knocking upon his shattered, special-ordered, etched-glass, half-paneled door. Oh, his pride and joy! Perhaps the depiction of this man requires more rumination as well. He will be undoubtedly mistaken as the protagonist of this world, and more perspective may be needed to define the true depths of the man. To continue reading this story in search of divine inspiration could only accurately be described as inanity. Neither am I Homer, detailing in poetic verse an epic tale of unavailing hope or the strength of human compassion, and outlining bravery and courageousness, only to hindsight a peculiar weakness to bring about a desolate end. Nor is this the story of a man being guided by the divine hands of Virgil as he hopelessly descends deeper into the depths of the 10 well-known circles of hell in search of a path to God. If it is truly tales of heroism and grandeur that you seek, place this book back where you found it. Drive your ass down to your local bookstore. Locate its expansive fantasy aisle. It will be the one past the big dragon poster, and search the shelves for The Cruelty of Magic. Keep looking. The pitiful disgrace of a man lying still, hoping that the drums of war pounding upon his door would cease, was just like any other. As with all men who stepped foot in this world, he came riddled with vices that often led derelict men of confusion to be absence of purpose or direction. Rarely would this man's actions originate from a desire towards some greater good of humanity. His mind could barely contain even a tenuous thought toward the well-being of anyone past himself. Yet, I suppose, one cannot deny him the capability of empathy. Toil and abandonment, both of his own volition and the chaos entangling his life with others, brought the bereft shell of a callous and sullen man we find coiled on this out-of-date, cheaply built sleeper sofa. Hell, some previous sexual encounters would not feel comfortable even calling him the shell of a man, but I digress. The accompaniment knocking was not the polite, neighborly, "Mind if I borrow a cup of sugar?" knock. Anger emanated with each beat strike, flowing like the 1,000 hooves in a thunderous herd of buffalo, upset by the lack of evidence they received after paying their hard-earned money to find proof of their cheating-ass husband's affair. "You fucking dick!" echoed the less than 5-foot-tall poise of a dame shadowed through the shattered etched glass window, embroidered with remnants of mirrored letters that was supposed to read, "Stan Greene, Private Eye." The woman standing behind the glass physically embodied an embolism, which would explain the lack of oxygen received by her face as she tried to force her way through the hole in the shattered glass panel of the office door. When he could no longer ignore the ongoing stampede, she unleashed upon his door. Stan slowly rose from the mattress. The hat protecting his eyes from the rising sun fell atop his head, in sync with his feet finding the floor. It landed comfortably next to him on the mattress, as if the hat was in protest and requesting just 5 more minutes. The half-burned roach resting on his chest fell similarly to his lap. The sunlight already forced its way into the apartment, greeting Stan as it peered into the 3rd-floor studio apartment through the open curtains, illuminating the hovel Stan called his home. Stan did not return the greeting hospitably. He groaned as he stretched out his back. A singular crack for each and every year, plus the hard sorrows Stan delved from his body into over the course of his life. As his spinal column aligned into place, there was a particular spot, akin to the back of his clavicle, that if he could manage to crack, his body would feel a surge of air rush through, awakening every darkened cavity throughout his frame. Unfortunately, this would not be one of those days. "My lawyer said these pictures are useless." The estranged voice of his pending visitor startled Stan in a way the incessant knocking never could. "They prove that he's a cheat as much as this shit office of yours proves you're a fucking success. I know you're in there, so open the goddamn door." Her green eyes peered through the softball-sized hole in the door's window pane. Her commands fell faint on his ears as he haphazardly lit the roach he retrieved from his lap. Stan paused for a moment, watching the flame tickle the tip of his almost forgotten friend. When it refused to light, Stan relented, standing from his seating position, stretching his arms into the air as he yawned. Quickly folding his sleeper sofa into its frame, he quietly replaced the cushions with his hat atop him. He hoped this might prevent the age-old rumor from spreading further, that he lived within his office. It did not. Stan fell upon the sofa cushions and leaned over his bent knees, using his hands to wipe the fatigue from his face. His long and thinning hair hung to his shoulders in a way that made it seem as if he might be a long-lost, estranged son of Lord Eddard Stark. He tried to adjust it blindly with finesse in an attempt at improving his appearance. It failed. Placing his hat atop his head, Stan walked over to his coat rack. He slipped his arm into the patched sleeve of the indiscernible colored trench coat. Perhaps it was a khaki brown at one point, but it was now a discolored and gray, as was the streak that grew prominently in the hair upon his head. He would like to think it made him a silver fox, and perhaps it did. One would not complacently describe him as handsome per se, but you would not enjoy seeing him pop up in your mature filter on Pornhub either. "Open up! You act like I can't see you in there!" Their eyes finally made contact through the cracked and splintered window pane. "Would you just..." With a tired, frustrated sigh normally reserved for sleepless fathers roaming the night in search of the small amounts of rest they consume while enduring the shrieking of their child, and she that bore it to the world, Stan continued, "I'm coming, okay? I'm coming. I'll be right there." He barely turned the knob to open the door when his nostrils filled with a familiar fragrance of raspberry and lavender melded together in an unbalanced tango of the senses. Her face sat contrary to her scent, giving him the distinct impression something had just taken a vile bowel movement beneath her nose. She stood, arms crossed, glaring in disgust of her inhospitable host. Her disgust was not entirely unwarranted, as Stan wasn't known to be a clean man. "Finally!" she said, exasperated, pushing him to the side as she crossed the threshold. A quick preliminary glance around the room revealed his less than pristine lifestyle. The half-burned blunt, balled-up pieces of garbage strewn about his floor, and a layer of dust accumulated on the counters and furniture throughout Stan's office. She remained unconvinced that this was not his apartment, as it was filled with all the amenities one would imagine befall a middle-aged man absent of purpose in his life, lacking the distinct ability to organize even his silverware correctly. She threw a file on his desk. "He said it wasn't enough to prove he's cheating. In fact, he said it looked as though they were on a business dinner. I paid you good money to help me finalize this divorce, and I expect you to keep your end of the deal," she said, digging through her obnoxiously purple purse for a cigarette. Maybe he's not cheating, Stan said glibly, offering her a light from his match. That's not the point, is it, Stan? The fiery vixen leaped from her seated position to lean over his desk. Stan couldn't ignore her cleavage, adding immensely to her appeal as he lit her cigarette. You knew the terms when you took the money. This isn't about the truth. She turned away from him, placing her things back into her purse. The volume of her voice never changed. Now smoke your fucking blunt. Take a piss or a shit or whatever the hell it is you do when you wake up, because I saw you climb off that cruddy little couch. She turned toward Stan, pointing at his bed before trampling abruptly toward the door. Then, get your shit together. She slammed the door behind her as she left. Her silhouette faded out of the window pane. At the same time, another shadow, belonging to a well-postured man, entered into it. Excuse me. Stan listened as a surprised, much lower, and far less seductive voice emerged. The voice stammered to ask the buffalo something else, but she shrugged him off with a surprisingly gruff noise. The silhouettes faded into a single darkness, and one, much more somber shadow prevailed. A knock delivered with much more respect toward the manufacturer of the door than felt formerly, was followed by a stern but gentle, "Hello, may I come in?" Jesus, I suppose so. Stan stared at the roach he was conflicted to finish. The door squeaked open as the non-threatening stature of a well-dressed man took form from behind the window pane and entered the well-lit studio apartment. Huh, the man said in discovery with a slack jaw that reminded Stan of precisely how low his ball bag drooped as of late. You must be Dick. It's Stan, he grumbled, the roach falling out of his hand because of the unique attempt at intimidation he was unconvincingly trying to convey by shaking his hand at the man. Guess that explains it then. They must have been calling you a dick. Stan merely replied with the smug look on his face as he began crawling on the floor in search of his fallen comrade. He surrendered to the idea that his missing roach may have landed beneath the sofa and sighed heavily to himself. He knew he would have to eventually dig into that bottomless abyss. However, for the time being, he twisted the top off the jar. Its strong, pungent aroma filled the room instantly. You know, I've been in this town since the very beginning, but I'm still not used to seeing it everywhere. They don't call it the town pot-built for nothing, Stan recalled smugly as he broke apart the last of his bud on his desk. He sat across the desolate landscape of lost cases and unpaid bets from the thin, well-dressed man. Files from past cases, never resolved, divided the distance between them. Photographs and other pages with Stan's handwritten notes scribbled in the margin dressed the top of the desk like a menagerie of lost faces, each exhibiting its own remnants of debris left from forgotten packed pipes and hand-rolled cigarettes. What can I do for you? Stan kicked his feet on the desk, as if all the years of his life culminated in this one opportunity to knock a few of his files off his desk onto the floor. The filing system of a knuckle-dragging Neanderthal. He showed no worry or care, as if this was a completely natural occurrence. Making a quick glance at the fallen files and raising an eyebrow toward Stan, he replied, Ah, straight to the point. My kind of guy. The name's Jimmy Book. The well-postured but non-threatening man outstretched his hand to shake Stan's with a smile, possibly genuine. The sleuth simply stared at Jimmy's hand with a blank expression on his face. He was unabashed. A long meerschaum pipe quickly appeared in his hand. Stan cashed the remnants into his opposite hand, casually rubbing the ashes into his thigh. Jimmy seemed to take the hint. Right. Well. He brushed his hand off his lapel. I'm looking for a man that can be discreet. From what I'm told, you're that man. Stan struck a match off the back of a faded and worn matchbook, its dirty Vegas logo completely visible from his hand. "They've apparently said I'm a dick too," he reported sarcastically as he took a puff from the pipe. "At this point, I'd say that builds credibility more than anything," the man rebutted as he sat in the dust-covered, rarely used seat across from Stan and crossed one leg over the other with a smile. "Humph," Stan smirked, taking his pipe out of his mouth. "Alright, so what's the gig?" Stan chuckled, shaking the match. The man's enthusiasm seemed to amuse him. "I'm on this case." "Case?" interjected Stan with slightly more interest than shown previously. That word meant money to our titular private eye. "Yes, a case," Jimmy answered quickly. "I'm a local lawyer, and there's this client I've had for many years that believes there was a local distributor that he suspects of questionable business practices." A long look filled the attorney's face, but it seems nothing can be found on the books. "So," Stan grunted, leaning forward to grab his potential client's attention, "you'd like me to utilize some questionable business practices so that you can prove that someone else is utilizing questionable business practices." The smirk that once rested upon the lawyer's face had all but faded since its entry. "No," said Stanley shortly. "I don't need that kind of trouble." He began trailing off toward the end, following the sight of another shadow forming within his window pane. The mail slot opened, and a bright pink envelope shoved through. The sight made Stan's stomach drop, like the testicles of a middle school boy looking at a Playboy for his first time. "Great, what now?" Stan thought coarsely. He quickly reached for the matchbook and the pipe once more, as he crossed the room to grab the envelope. Jimmy eyed Stan suspiciously as Stan inspected the envelope lying on the floor, while he created a cloud of smoke to envelop himself. The arriving envelope radiated with malcontent. In return, with the words, "Final Termination Notice," stamped in red on the front. Stan groaned as he bent down to pick it up, the smoke escaping from his lungs through his orifices. "It seems to me you could use a bit more of this trouble, to pay for your bills," Jimmy said. Stan gaped at his inherent ward with disgust. Tearing open the envelope, he planted himself back into his chair. "What's the pay?" His feet kicked back up with more angst than before. More files fell to the ground to match those that fell formerly. Stan's eyes scanned the paper in the envelope for the fiscal damage, and it read, $534.76. "You'll be compensated for your discretion, of course," Jimmy spoke. "How does 550 sound? Appropriate?" It was the perfect amount, but he came to Stan, not the other way around. 1,000 plus expenses. So I'd say about 1,500 should get the job done. Odd. The defender of law gave the investigator a mocking look. "You were able to calculate expenses with little knowledge of the job." His smile returned to his face. "But fine. I expected you to be a dick about it after all what they've said." Jimmy stood from the dusty chair. "Who is this they you keep referring to?" Stan asked, visibly annoyed. "It's of little consequence." Jimmy pulled out a thick envelope, white in nature, from his inner coat pocket. "There's $2,000 in there. I'm sure you'll find that to be enough. I'll be in contact." He simpered. "I see certain supplies in need already." The lawyer glanced toward the almost empty mason jar on the table between them. "See you tomorrow." Jimmy buttoned his suit jacket, wiping off the dust that had accumulated on his pants, then took his leave. Stan sat in silent disbelief for a moment. gawking at the money within the envelope sprawled on the files that had not yet fallen onto the floor. He went to kick up his feet once more, but the back of his chair suddenly failed, ejecting him backward upon the floor. The private eye now lay on the ground for a moment, staring at the ceiling. His lungs fought for air. He checked to make sure the money in the envelope had not spilled out. Once confirming everything was still safely tucked into its place, Stan released a sigh of relief as he rolled onto his stomach and turned to get his feet beneath him. In that moment, a paper crumpled on the floor caught his eye. He struggled to stand for a moment, holding onto his desk to keep his balance. Staring at the paper on the ground, he slowly rounded his desk to get a better look. He immediately recognized it as a crumpled-up lottery ticket. Possibly, it had fallen from that broad's ridiculous purse, or even possibly the lawyer's pocket, though the latter was less likely. He flattened the paper and studied the front of the ticket briefly. The numbers on the front reminded him of a hypnotic, almost rhythmic beat. He found another set of numbers, 0519-99-0, handwritten on the back in black ink.